Welcome to today's complimentary webinar, The Changing Landscape of Federal HCM Solutions. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Erin Spencer and I'll be your moderator for our session. I would like to take this opportunity to tell you a little about Brandon Hall Group. Brandon Hall Group was established in 1992 and was formerly Brandon Hall Research. As you may know, we are a research and analyst advisor firm. We have nearly 200,000 subscribers to our services and over 10,000 clients globally. Brandon Hall Group focuses on the areas of learning and development, talent management, leadership development, and executive management. We also specialize in sales effectiveness and marketing impact. We have several offerings for our members, including our Research Member Center, our Knowledge Bases, a Smart Choice certification program, and our Excellence Awards program. I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Our first presenter is Stacey Harris, the Vice President of Research and Advisory Services here at Brandon Hall Group. We also have a group of panelists joining us today. They're Jeff Perry, the Director of Software Development at Meridian Knowledge Solutions, Sean Duguay, the Director of Business Development at CGI Federal Solutions, and Terry Miller, the COO Federal Solutions at Visionary Integration Professionals. I'd like to thank Meridian for sponsoring today's webinar. Meridian provides the industry-leading Meridian Global LMS and an array of supporting professional services custom designed to align to unique client needs. They are the #1 ranked human capital management company for customer loyalty with a documented customer retention rate of 98%. Their solutions empower organizations to optimize their learning technology, business processes, and drive breakthrough results. Before we begin, I'd like to invite you as attendees to take an active role in today's presentation. There will be poll questions throughout today's webinar, as well as a question and answer period near the close of our session. If you wish to ask a question during today's presentation, we would encourage you to do so. You may ask questions by typing in the question box of your control panel. I will be monitoring today's questions and will be providing some of your questions to today's presenters for their feedback as time permits. Also, all attendees will receive a copy of the slides and a recording of the presentation after the webinar. I'll now turn today's platform over to Brandon Hall Group's Stacey Harris, who will fill us in on today's agenda.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you, Erin, for that great introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Hopefully, wherever you're at, it's not quite as cold as it is here in Ohio today. Hopefully, it's a little bit warmer where you're at, but we're really excited to be bringing a great topic to discussion today and a great panel of experts who I think are really going to not only help provide some thought leadership around where some of the critical questions are around the changing landscape of federal human capital management solutions today, but also I think be able to get to some real on-the-ground practical discussions with you today and the audience about what is happening in the federal space when it comes to technology and the discussions that are taking place around cloud and talent management systems and learning management systems and how all those things are working together. So we're hoping to have a really good conversation today. We will ask, as Erin said, that as you have questions today, we'll answer them throughout the conversation. So please feel free to add your questions in the Q&A box. Should be on your right-hand side panel. Feel free to say hello and where you're joining from this afternoon as well. We'll have a couple of polling questions for everybody to get participations in, and we'll also, as Erin mentioned, be sending out the deck as well as the recording of this event following today's session. So real quickly, the agenda for this morning or this afternoon will be to talk about the changing learning and talent technology landscape, as I had just commented on. We'll also, as I said, get down to some nitty-gritty discussions around the difference between software as a service, infrastructure as a service, as well as platforms as a service, and how these letters will make a difference in how you think about cloud, the word cloud, and the changes taking place in that for the federal space. And we've got some great talent here who's going to be talking about what that means from your perspective, but also from a technical perspective. We're also going to have discussions on the impact and value of integrating learning and talent at the federal level. What does that mean from both a compliance and a agency perspective, and how that looks as organizations are starting to get mandates around that. And then we'll talk a little bit today about the realities of cloud delivery models. We're going to talk about security concerns, delivery options, cost options, and opportunities, and what does that really look like in organizations that are trying to make a difference today about what they're doing from a technical perspective on the learning and the human capital management front. So we're going to, and Patrick, thank you for saying hello, calling from sunny Sacramento. I'm very glad at least somebody is a little bit warmer today than we are here. But thank you for saying hello. we're going to start today off with a quick poll question with the audience, because we want to understand a little bit about who's out there and what are your sort of roles within the learning and talent technology space, so we can make sure that we're tailoring the conversation to some of the things that will be most important to you. So I'm going to launch the poll, and I'll ask you to sort of go ahead and answer that. Are you someone in your organization that sets or advises on budgets for learning only technology? Are you someone who sets or advises on budgets for talent technology only? Are you someone who supports or implements the technology today, or are you someone who uses the technology to deliver the programs that you currently run, whether that's talent or learning, or other? And if it's other, give me what your role is in the Q&A box. I'd love to hear that. Again, our goal today is to make sure that we're having a conversation that's really going to make a difference and give you something to take back to your teams. And so if you have an other and it's not something we've listed up here, just go ahead and put it in the Q&A box, and we'll make sure we're also trying to address it from that perspective. Give everybody a few minutes to answer. We got just about 75% of the vote. We'll give one more minute, so we'll see if we can get up to about 80. There we go. Perfect. 92%. We're going to go ahead and close that. And I'm going to share that with everyone. So right now we have about 18% who advise on budgets for learning. We have 27% of the audience who are advising on budgets for talent. So we'll make sure to talk a little bit about the talent market, where all that is going today then. 36% who support or implement the technology. That's definitely Jeff, and Sean will be able to give a lot of insight on the implementation side. 9% who use the technology to deliver your own programs, which is a really important role, particularly as influencers who have a say in sort of what can be done in the market. And 9% say other at this point in time. So great. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to hide that here. We're going to go on and talk a little bit about sort of the changing human capital management technology landscape. Whether you're in corporations or businesses, nonprofits or governments, there is some general changes taking place across the market. And here at Brandon Hall Group, we've been sort of following this for many years, for those of you who know us. And a lot of it started out, first and foremost, on the learning side. Learning has been something that has been core learning elements have been tracked for over 15, 20 years in organizations. I did my first LMS on a phone registration system, right? And that's when organizations were really focused on things like enrollments and launch online courses and testing and tracking progress and completions, learning paths, and reporting on who took what from a compliance perspective. And really that was the primary focus of what we would call a learning management system, just about even 8 to 10 years ago in many cases. Over the years, as HR systems started to evolve as well as learning systems, we also saw that learning started to add additional elements that were called more robust learning elements, such as managing classrooms, virtual classrooms, competency management, certification, skill gap analysis, content authoring, and e-commerce. And this is where we're starting to see here that it gets pretty broad about what people are going to be talking about, but it's still a pretty big focus on just learning and development. What we're seeing today, which I think is the piece where we're going to have a lot of conversations about, is that learning and development and human capital management technology really started to merge. And within that merging, we started to see organizations add things like collaboration tools, such as social learning, networking, media, mobile learning elements that had to do with both how you thought about your talent pools and how you interacted and communicated with people. And then we also saw that people started to look at things like talent management elements, onboarding, leadership development, sourcing and recruiting, performance management, and all of that sort of was fed by the need to have better reporting, better talent management, and better focus on the human capital assets within our organization. This is the trend that we've seen in sort of the technology space for quite some time, but the market has been shifting, and we're going to ask our first panelist today, which is Jeff Perry, to actually talk a little bit about not only his experience as Director of Software Development at Meridian Knowledge Solutions, but really about, from his perspective in his experience both with the federal space and the market as a whole, what are the changes that he sees taking place in the learning and talent technology market and how those changes are having a big impact on the federal space, particularly today. So Jeff, based off of what I just talked about, can you maybe give a little bit about your background and share an answer to that first question for the audience?
Absolutely. Thanks, Stacy. So as Stacy mentioned, my name is Jeff Perry. I'm the Director of Software Development at Meridian. I also oversee our hosted solutions and infrastructure teams. I've been with Meridian what is going to be coming up on 11 years this May. And, you know, as some of you may know, that have joined today, Meridian's been heavily focused on the federal market since our inception. And, through my tenure, I've overseen hundreds of implementations that we've successfully rolled out for our customers, and have worked very heavily with customers within the federal government, including FBI, DHS, DOD, as well as customers within the intelligence community to deploy successful learning and talent management solutions. So, overseeing, really everything from a technical perspective as it touches the learning and talent systems that we provide to our customers. Within the federal space and within the industry, there are a couple things that really come to mind, to answer Stacy's question here, in terms of things that are changing that have a significant impact. And I think, one of the biggest ones is just the HCM market in general. And, that we see that there's obviously a lot of consolidation that's happening within the market. In some cases, there's, financial instability within some of the providers that's causing, some agencies or some organizations to really reevaluate the solutions as they look forward to the next 5 or 7 years and determine who, they want to be partnered with to deploy, successful solutions over the next term. So they want to, organizations want to make sure that they have a trusted advisor and someone that can really help them implement those successful solutions as they, look forward, not just today and tomorrow, but, years in the future. So another one, obviously, more geared toward government is, there's always been the notion within government that we need to do more with less. But there's even more of an increased focus on that now. And there is a lot of pressure being asked upon agencies to do more with less. And what that means is that organizations and agencies are looking to see how they can eliminate huge capital expenditures and upfront costs with deploying systems and large integrator costs, straight out of the gate. And they're looking for more nimble solutions and more nimble providers to be able to deploy those solutions. This is also leading to looking at the solutions that are in-house, the solutions that they have today, and looking to see how maybe we can consolidate some of those platforms onto one solution, whether that's combining talent and performance and learning all together, or just looking at multiple disparate systems and consolidating those. And then finally, I would say, within the 25-point plans that have been put out by OPM and put out, there are cascading effects from that are looking at not only data center consolidation and things like that within the federal space, but also looking at organizations that are being pushed toward a cloud-first policy, and looking at better ways to utilize and maximize resources, and how to eliminate some of those cost challenges and internal resource challenges that exist today. So I think those are really the key aspects that are really changing within the space that are going to have a major effect on the federal space going forward.
Thanks, Jeff. I mean, all those things you just mentioned, I think, are happening in other industries as well. But on the federal space, it sounds like there really are some things that are going to be impacted, not just from the markets changing, but mandates are changing, is what you're saying. And so I think that's sort of an interesting differentiator in some of that. Now, Sean Duguay is our Director of Business Development for CGI and Federal Solutions. And Sean, I think you're going to take the conversation even a little bit deeper when you start talking about things like technology, pulling it all together, trying to get agencies to work together. And in one of those dialogues that we hear a lot about is this idea of the cloud. Can you maybe, Sean, give everybody a little bit of an overview of your background? You've worked in the federal space for a very long time, and how that how you've worked within the federal space with this new concept of the cloud, which has been somewhat of a taboo for the last several years for the federal space. Particularly, I know you're going to get into some actual descriptions about what these letters that everybody's been talking about, SAS and IAS and PAAS, mean. Can you maybe share with us a little bit of your background and an answer to that question, Sean?
Yes, thank you very much, Stacy. I appreciate that. So I spent about 10 years in the government myself before hitting private industry in the mid-1990s, and I've been in government integration now for quite some time. And also during this time, for about 2.5 years, I actually worked for a competitor of Meridian's, selling an LMS and software as a service, and also the content itself. So I am very familiar with this particular space. In a sense to how it applies to not only the human resource capitalists who need to do their job, but again, going back to what Jeff was saying, doing more with less, and that's really where this concept has really come about. So let me start from a high-level view and just say cloud computing as a whole. When people hear the words cloud computing, if they're not really read up on the subject, it's extremely confusing. There's just so many different aspects to what cloud computing really is. And what I'd like to do is just real quickly read 3 definitions to you. And the reason why I'm going to read these 3 is because these definitions in and of themselves have actually added to the confusion. So the very first one is from NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which we all follow guidance with. And their definition of cloud computing is a model for enabling ubiquitous, convenient, on-demand network access to a shared pool of configurable computing resources. Examples are networks, servers, storage, application, and services. And that these services can be rapidly provisioned and released with minimal management effort or service provider interaction. So that's a very long definition. But let me give you 2 resources that are more easily read. Gartner in 2010 put out a definition that cloud computing is a style of computing in which massively scalable IT-enabled capabilities are delivered as a service to external customers using Internet technologies. And one of Gartner's competitors, named Forrester, in 2011, put out their definition, and their definition was a standardized IT capability, services, software, or infrastructure delivered via Internet technology in a pay-per-use or self-service way. The last one I'm going to give you is really kind of off the cuff. If you've read or understand any of these 3 definitions, the last one is probably the one you hear the most. Any vendor who comes to talk to you adds as a service at the end of their definition. What that means is it's adding to the confusion of the 3 definitions that are out there. So, Stacey, if you can go to that very first slide real quick, and I can talk a little bit about what these definitions really are. So if you think about all of the things that I just told you in the definitions, both from NIST, Gartner, and Forrester, there are different types of services out there, and they all have to be able to work together for any government agency to take advantage of the service themselves, especially in this time with doing more with less. So the very base of these services, down at the bottom of the screen, you see infrastructure as a service. When you build a house, you have to have some sort of infrastructure in place before you do anything. So the base is always here. There are some organizations that will claim that they have a base as an infrastructure, but it doesn't work to save the money that's necessary to be saved. So you have to start with a provider of some sort who has an infrastructure as a service capability. It isn't enough just to have that. You actually have to have the authority to operate within the government agency. And then there are some certifications that they need to acquire. Specifically, if you're going to procure through the GSA, they have their own BPA, and there are providers on that BPA. Inside an individual agency, each one of them have an authority to operate. And then there's also a security standard for 508 compliance, which will basically give an authorization across different federal agencies, and that's through the FedRAMP certification, which many of you may have heard about already. On top of the infrastructure, you have platform as a service. You're talking about databases, your DBMSs, the testing tools, and any virtual environments. A lot of infrastructure as a service providers will have a platform as a service, but they will most likely work with other vendors out there to incorporate their platform as a service into the infrastructure itself to be able to provide the service. And then the top layer, software as a service. This is where we have what we need to have for you as the user to be able to interact with and use throughout your daily lives, whether it's citizen engagement, reaching out to the communities. Government productivity is a big one. As a service is becoming more and more popular just for things like log-on access and things like that. Business enablement, Salesforce.com may not necessarily be something that a government agency is using, but the capabilities and infrastructure inside Salesforce.com actually is very helpful and useful. So at a very high level, what you're looking at is 3 different types of service that come together as one so that you, the user, and the government can take advantage of cloud computing. Daisy?
And then we have the other slide as well. Did you want to talk through this a little bit, Sean, which is the services framework? Does that help a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it depends on the audience as to where they're sitting in this particular area. Again, I kind of talked about the top left-hand side with the gray boxes where infrastructure, platform, and software sits. Down on the very bottom, those are the things that we are providing as a service that you don't necessarily see as a user. The data network security things, the routers, the firewalls, the LANs, certifications and compliance, everything that's on that bottom layer, those are core foundational capabilities that any infrastructure as a service provider is going to have to bring so that you can enjoy the services such as the software as a service. So if you take the bottom aspect, that's your infrastructure. That's the stuff that we have that puts all your technology together. Those cloud services up top, once that infrastructure is established, you can take advantage. And over on the right-hand side, you can see there's, depending on your technologists that are in the audience, they would fit in one of those particular areas. That's pretty much it from a high-level perspective.
Yeah, great. I know this is a lot of detail here, but we think it's really important to get into this level of conversation because it really is. The confusion in the market is actually scaring some people away from using technology that could be real beneficial for some of the work they're doing today. And I think, explanations like this, Sean, do a lot to help sort of give people some idea of how all this is fitting together. One thing, is if you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box on any of these screens as we're showing them. Sort of shifting gears a little bit from sort of this really granular concept about the cloud and the technology and how it's going to work for an organization. One of the things that Brandon Hall does on a regular basis is we do primary research and do surveys out to the market. And one of the surveys we did last year was called the Relationship-Centered Learning Survey. And in that survey, we asked over 600 organizations, what were your top 5 organizational priorities? About 12% of that audience was what we call federal and nonprofit entities. And not surprising, their top 5 organizational priorities were definitely very different from corporate and for-profit organizations, right? And so cutting expenses, 39.4% of the people that we surveyed said that cutting expenses was one of their top 2 priorities that they were dealing with in 2012 and 2013. The other one that sort of I thought was an interesting one was improving customer satisfaction. 39% also said that this was really important for them, and customers being your whoever might be the audience that you're serving is really a big deal that we're hearing come out both from a federal perspective but also from an agency perspective and level, is that idea of who is your customer and what is the opportunity to satisfy them on a regular basis. Another one that was really surprising was building strong cultures. 30% was saying that was a really top one. We also saw things like improving innovation and recruiting and retaining talent. Surprisingly, when you looked at the non-government for-profit entities, their biggest drivers and goals for the year had to do more with gaining market share, improving innovation, and growing globally as organizations, and at a lower level customer satisfaction. Recruiting and retaining talent wasn't quite as big an issue for them, I think, on a global front as it is definitely we're hearing on the federal space. And I think, Terry, this is one of the questions that we thought you could really speak to because you've been doing a lot of work as the COO of the Federal Solutions for Visionary Integration Professionals. You really do get a chance to see how some of the mandates that are coming down in the federal space are driving some of those things, like the need for what we would consider customer satisfaction or their constituency satisfaction, as well as the need for a real focus on talent management. Can you talk a little bit, Terry, about your background and how you're seeing that the importance of talent development is growing in the federal space right now?
Sure. Thank you, Stacy. So to start out, I mean, like Sean, I spent a number of years in government as well, and then made the transition out of government, going into working with a number of the large federal systems integrators around the D.C. area, where my focus, I think, did spend a lot of time with a focus around kind of broad solutions, but then also around a number of cloud computing solutions as well. So we've seen a lot of different kind of activity in this space, and then, of course, now most recently, joining BIP as COO of Federal, so I've been with the company now for just about a year with BIP. But to give you a little bit of background, I think one of the big things that I think we've seen when it comes to the government and talent management, probably a big area I think would really kind of come to the federal agencies, and a lot of work around succession planning. So one of the big things that I think that we've really noticed is that in the past, some of those traditional methods probably were not as adequate as some of the things that are available today for different types of solutions. And to give you an example, most recently, when you look at the number of people in government and people who are in different types of positions, PwC did a recent study, and out of that study, they said about 70% of people who are SES eligible within the federal government are soon to be eligible to retire. So, that kind of creates a little bit of a gap, within the federal government space when it comes to people within some of those different types of positions. And how do you manage those positions? How do you make sure you have the right talent in those positions and make sure you're cultivating that current talent that you have? And there really have been, I think, from when you talked a little bit about some of the federal mandates and different things that have been going on, there are a few different reasons, I think, why some of that's been happening. I mean, number one, I think part of it's been you've had a little bit of an aging workforce. Also, throughout the 80s, within the federal government, you had changes into the pension systems that made it easier for people to lead different types of positions. And then also, when you went into the 90s, you saw a decrease in the federal workforce of about 500,000. So some of those things really have made it very important that you have kind of that talent management, talent identification early on within federal agencies. And so a lot more attention's really now been given to how do you cultivate that current talent to fill the ranks and make sure that you've got the right people and you've got the right skill sets, and you're also reaching out and bringing new people into government, and within that, developing their different sets of talent. So I think some of the steps that at least I've seen where the agencies within the federal government are trying to take, number one, they're trying to understand their current state of their pipeline of individuals and people. Number two, it's really trying to understand the process of leadership development and talent development. Then, number three, really knowing how to fill, that pipeline. Number four, tracking, that talent within the pipeline. And number five, using that current data to be able to focus their resources to support their current talent and make sure that they've got the right skill sets that they need. So I think it really leads, all those different types of things. When you talk about, some of the movement within federal, it leads exactly into the need of, why you have to have the right types of tools to be able to track, develop, make sure people are moving along the right different types of systems so that they are going to be prepared and the government's prepared and has the right people within those different types of positions to move forward.
Yeah, and I think that, these two worlds sort of converging, this technology discussion and this discussion on talent development and learning and development and how all that sort of comes together can be seen in how the data is coming out. As you just mentioned, Terry, PwC data is sort of showing that there is a gap, there is a need in the federal space to have more talent, skilled talent in various areas. We're also seeing that on the flip side, when we asked federal organizations and nonprofit entities about their current learning technology landscape, we're seeing that this market is shifting pretty dramatically. Currently, about 83% of the government and nonprofit entities that we surveyed just last year, it's about of 400 participants, so it's about 88 within the subgroup of government and nonprofit entities, said that they were using an LMS. 17% said that no, at this point in time they're not using an LMS. That's about a 10% increase from the previous year. So we know that this is really, an LMS is sort of becoming a mandated, required, absolutely necessary tool to do some of the work that you just talked about, Terry. I think what's really interesting, and this harkens back to some of the work that we'd heard when we were talking to Jeff and Sean, was that 55% of those surveyed said they have an installed LMS today, and 33% said they have a hosted LMS, but it's hosted by a vendor, and then there's about 10% that said they have it installed on a third-party platform. Now, what Brandon Hall is seeing that is across the globe at all LMSs, with whether you're in nonprofit or for-profit industries, is that we're seeing that the hosted LMS or the cloud-based LMS is definitely increasing in market share. But here in the federal space, it's not growing quite as fast, but it's definitely growing faster than what I think some people expected it to. And part of that, I think, is for two reasons. One is that we know that in the federal space, those organizations who currently are managing these LMS systems are managing large groups of people. So over 40% of them say they serve more than 5,000 people, which means that they have a lot of people that they're dealing with on a regular basis from a compliance and a learning and development and a growth perspective. We also know from the data that we're seeing that over 50% of those organizations who currently have an LMS are looking to replace their current learning management system. And part of that is that 70% have owned their current LMS for more than 3 years. So we have large groups of employees and constituencies on these LMSs. Many of them have been in place for over 3 years. And currently, over about 40% of them say that their IT groups currently have an extensive involvement in their LMS administration, which means there's a lot of time that's being invested from an IT perspective on these learning management systems that may not be something that the organizations are looking to continue to have that type of IT investment. And so what that turns into is the top reasons for replacing an LMS in government and nonprofit entities, and the top reasons for selecting a new LMS in government and nonprofit entities really are two sides of, I think, of a coin. The top reasons for replacing an LMS are lack of content authoring tools, lack of talent management integration, which goes back to what Terry was just talking about, and a wish to move from an internally installed system to a SaaS system. When we pulled this data, it was almost like, well, we had just, we were pulling this data as we were starting to talk about doing this webinar, and we said this really does fit what we're seeing happening in the market, right, which is why we wanted to do a webinar on this topic. Now, when they're looking for new systems, what we're seeing is that the focus is on ease of use, ability to integrate at enterprise levels, reporting features, and cost issues. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So we're going to ask Sean and Jeff particularly to answer a couple of questions that harken back to some of those things that we're seeing in the data. So maybe, Sean, we'll start off with you. Can you talk a little bit about, does it cost less if you use the cloud in a federal environment? Is that something you've seen, particularly with the work that you've been doing with the organizations?
So I can give you the short answer is yes, but it does take a little while. What I suggest my clients do or prospective clients do is really take a look at the cloud in a business challenge mindset. What are you really trying to achieve with this aspect? Are you trying to achieve an acceleration in delivery times? Are you trying to expand and contract as needed for the use of what you've already paid for? Are you trying to relieve the constraints based on IT's capacity to deliver? If you're looking at business agility, then of course you're definitely going to be able to gain some cost savings when moving to the cloud. But more importantly, where the cloud really helps is when you preserve capital. You shift basically from a CapEx to an OpEx perspective. You free up capital for more strategic investments. You can manage your IT sprawl and contain the infrastructure itself, and overall become more cost effective. And And we've done this numerous times throughout the federal government already. But again, it has to be an individual, intimate conversation with the business stakeholders of the agency as to what they're trying to accomplish. So it's not a simple answer, but the short answer would be yes.
And Jeff, maybe, oh, sorry, did you have an additional comment on that, John?
No, I was just going to jump in there as well and follow up Sean. You know, I share the same view as Sean. It's not always the easiest answer, and the cost model certainly does change a bit, more from an upfront capital expenditure, you know, for a large system deployment where you may have initial, you know, license costs and hardware configurations and infrastructure, to more of an OpEx type of model. And you know, so that barrier to get started is much lower, and, you know, lets you really kind of pay as you go because you're maximizing those resources that you're using. And a lot of that risk from an upfront stand-up and from a scaling perspective is offloaded to the vendor. And I know that's a big, you know, within the government and within the commercial space as well. You know, there's a big shift in trying to, you know, shift that risk and shift that onus onto the vendors who are providing these solutions. So, you know, there is, you know, obviously the benefit from being able to scale as you grow, and, you know, most SaaS solutions will give you a scalable model that you can continue to add users to, and then the vendor is really on the hook to scale that solution behind the scenes. And the other thing that it does is obviously it frees up the internal IT resources and frees up the onus that's on organizations to have to go request for IT resources for, you know, stand-up, scaling, monitoring, and everything of that nature. Obviously, it doesn't fully remove IT from the system deployment or their interaction, but it does reduce the level that they need to be involved so that they can, you know, really just be involved in the key aspects as it pertains to their organization.
And Sean or Jeff, did either of you have any general examples of organizations that have gone from sort of an installed version to a cloud version, and sort of general high-level costs that they went through in that discussion, or is it a little bit early yet?
No, I can probably jump in here and just kind of give you a little bit of an example of how this has worked. So I'll keep the specific government agency name down, but you may be able to figure out what I'm talking about here in just a second. So basically, we had a customer who had a requirement to provide public-facing visa functions with highly interactive sets of workflow processes, very similar to what Meridian and other providers put out there. They wanted to have the ability to see transactions. They wanted to be able to view the dashboards of the activities. They wanted to be able to integrate with other tool sets and other software as a service. And the challenge that was given to us is that there was an extremely short delivery time frame. We had 45 days to put this up and running. A large global user base. They had to leverage publicly available cloud development environments, and they needed to ensure the department maintained superior control, security, and efficiency. The bottom line is this service was deployed to 5 non-U.S. countries by this federal agency. 33,000 registered users, 105,000 login sessions in the first 30 days, and a cost savings of more than 50% over the traditional approach that was being used. So from a cloud perspective, that's just a very simple, high-level explanation of a 50% cost savings right out of the gate. And when these services are utilized by agencies in the LMS and in the you know, the total learning management system software, I can just imagine that those costs would be even better.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and you mentioned something there, which was the security issue, Sean. So can maybe you or Jeff cover the question of how are current federal organizations addressing security concerns? What questions should they ask if they are thinking about going in this direction?
Sure, I can hit a couple of those. I'm sure Jeff has just as many, and this is a subject that can probably last for about an hour and a half. But I'll give you 5 of the quick bullet points that I'll ask anybody that I'm sitting down with to help them address and understand whether or not they even want to go down this road. The very first thing I'm going to ask them is, do you, the client, need to verify identities of staff or customers beyond user ID and password? And if you do, that's going to take me down a whole network of questions. The next question is, do you, the client, create and compare against lists or galleries of authorized and unauthorized individuals? Do you run an insider threat program? Do you have populations of users who will opt in to a secure ID program in exchange for faster services? Getting that culture change to happen is going to be a whole new dynamic. And then do you, the customer, encrypt your data on your servers, PCs, laptops, and on mobile devices? And depending on the answers to those questions will help me or anybody in my position guide a discussion that's going to allow them to address those security questions and concerns. And I'm sure Jeff has a million more. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Sean. And I think these are some of the biggest questions that anybody, especially within the federal space, is asking themselves when they're talking about the cloud. Around security, and even around the next question, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is around data ownership. And if you're asking some questions, getting started with this process, you need to know from a provider how your data is being protected, not just at rest within the system, but in transit throughout the system. So as Sean said, from any sort of device all the way through the process in terms of navigating the system, whether it's from a mobile device or throughout the systems. You need to know how data is being controlled within the applications, but not just within the applications, but within the environment itself. And taking it kind of the next level, when you're looking at migrating into the cloud, you need to look at providers and whether they've looked at how the data will be migrated from your most likely on-premise solutions today that are sitting behind your firewall, and how it's going to be migrated to the cloud, and how it's going to be done, how it's going to be done securely. Many times, a lot of the systems are being deployed and have many years worth of data, and they're very large data sets that are likely going to be migrated into the cloud. So, looking at the various processes and policies and procedures that govern and how that data is going to be transferred into the cloud. And then, from an organization perspective, just looking at and making sure that you're asking the questions about the providers that are offering solutions, and making sure that they understand the government life cycle and the security processes, and knowing what it takes to get through and attain ATOs within agencies, within the government, and go through what used to be the certification and accreditation life cycle and is now transforming into the FedRAMP certification and ongoing monitor process. So, again, like Sean said, we could probably discuss this topic for hours, but those would be a couple of questions that I would throw out that people need to be really have on the forefront of their mind when they're looking at cloud solutions.
Yeah, those are all really great examples, I think, of things that people should be asking and questions they should be thinking about. What about the data portability issue? You sort of mentioned that at a high level, Jeff. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about data portability concerns, and they continue to rise in cloud solutions? Are those being addressed, and do you have examples of how organizations are addressing those right now?
Yeah, so obviously with any sort of cloud solution, and any organization that's going to want to migrate to that, they're most likely going to want to migrate data in, so that you're going to want to make sure that the data that they're putting in and they continue to put in over time is still data that they own. It's not something that is lost and kind of gone out into the cloud, so to speak, and that there's a change in perception, I think, among a lot of people around having the system that is deployed behind the firewall, having ownership and can go tap the server team on the shoulder that is managing that system, and that there's a sense of feeling that the data is close to them. And when moving to the cloud, they need to have the same comfort that the data that they're putting into the system is not only secure, but that they can also get that data when they need it. So if that touches many different areas, that touches integrations, for real-time integration back to their environment, being able to push and pull data out of the system in real time. But it also goes another step further, that if I need to get the data or the content or anything else that I put into those cloud-based systems out because I need to use it in other aspects of my business, or that I'm transferring to another solution, that I have the tools to be able to do that. So what we're seeing is that providers or any good solution will give an organization or an agency the tools that it needs to be able to not only get some of that data in, but be able to get that out as well. And that's really the key aspect of making sure that people understand that the data that they're putting in and the content that they're putting into these systems, they still continue to own, and that they have access to take that with them if they choose to transfer that to another platform.
Great. And Sean, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. So as a large integrator, we address this very similarly, but you have to have a plan to address the concerns. So the way that we approach it is, the very first thing we've got to do is inform and create awareness, right? Get rid of the hype that's out there for cloud, the understanding of cloud, the business delivery models. We want to make sure that the organization understands what they're trying to achieve. Once that happens, a quick assessment needs to be done. We want to figure out where the quick wins are, what the business strategy is to make sure, because we can look at this from a pure technical perspective, but at the bottom line, if it doesn't save the federal government or the organization money, then why are we doing it? So you've got to make sure you figure out where this is. After that is taken care of, you've got to look at application infrastructure readiness, right? Where are they? What is the current state? What high-level business cases could we put together today to make sure that these wins will become complete? And then, of course, you have to do the basic technical assessment. Once that's done, you've got to put together a roadmap, a full business case, migration plans, organizational impacts, assessments. This has to be done to ensure that, yes, there's data portability concerns, but do those data portability concerns actually make a difference to the overall roadmap? And then, of course, at the end, you have to look at delivery, implementation plans, application migration, different support models that you're going to have in place. So although Jeff and I may not be saying exactly the same thing, they actually integrate quite well, because where he is concerned and where his organization spends the most time, we'll have 10 other companies doing something similar, maybe not the same LMS or actual software as a service or anything, but another provider of services. So we look at it from a more global perspective.
Great. And then sort of on this idea that data and how important it is, and like you said, how important all of that connectivity is sort of driven by the fact that we aren't just talking about, in many cases, just an LMS. And you mentioned this, I think, Jeff, very eloquently when you're talking about the fact that there's other systems that you're connecting to. There's other things that are happening. And as we're starting to see this, we're seeing that organizations in the government and nonprofit areas are also thinking about the fact that how they do training, where they deliver training, where their content is housed is going to be very different in the next several years. Particularly, we see this is why a big focus on sort of top learning priorities is on creating a learning strategy and transitioning from ILT to some form of global dispersed delivery models. Implementing new learning technologies are big topics and big priorities right now for learning organizations in the government and nonprofit. And a lot of that has to do with, I think, where the content, where the information currently resides, I think, which is what you were just talking about, Jeff, which is that currently our research says that when you look at the type of delivery tools that organizations are using right now, particularly in the government and nonprofit, 98% of them are using some form of ILT. 95% of them are using some form of peer-to-peer training. 90% are using manager training, or even general internet. 90% are feeling that their people are getting trained from the general internet. 70% say that their content is sitting in their LMS right now. 49% say they're using public social platforms on some level, and it gets less and less as you go down to mobile devices and corporate social platforms. But what the research is showing us and what organizations are saying is, look, we are shifting how we deliver our content and where our content sits. So we have to think really differently about what content is and what data is within our organization. So I think all of this is sort of showing that a lot of the stuff you guys are talking about is really valid. Real quickly with the audience, we wanted to get one last poll question in today. I know we're running up against the last top of the hour, but we just wanted to understand from the audience again a little bit about, what, if you're looking at your future of talent and learning needs in the federal space, what are some of the things that are your biggest concerns? Is it the changing workforce demographics? Is it looming retirement cliff that Terry talked about? Is it the keeping up with technology expectations that we just talked about, whether it's cloud or data management or security issues? Is it more mandates and smaller budgets? I think everybody had talked a little bit about this. Or is there something else, some other that we haven't even mentioned today that's a big topic for you that you really need to get a better handle on to be able to address your future talent and learning needs in the federal space? We'll give a few minutes for everybody to answer that. While we're answering that, maybe, Terry, I'll turn to you a little bit. When you think about how learning and development and how organizations need to work together differently today and going forward, do you see that more federal organizations are thinking about doing learning in a different way, managing talent differently, and do you think that's having an impact on the type of technology they're looking at as well?
I think they are starting to, and I think each agency is probably taking different types of approaches to it and how they retain and get new talent. I think part of it actually has been around the technology too. And I can tell you, I've done a lot of work in the past with agencies like GSA, and one of the big things that they've talked about to retain and bring in a lot of new talent is to make sure that they have more up-to-date different types of technologies. And I know this wasn't a topic today, but things around like being able to bring your own device and be able to use the same types of technology that you use at home, so that you're able to get some of the younger people entering the workforce to be able to use a lot of those same things within federal agencies. So I think that's one of the things that I would say that I've seen a little bit of as far as trying to get some of that new talent to join.
Yeah. And I think our poll responses are pretty similar to what you were just sort of talking about. 30% worried about the looming retirement cliff, 29% are more mandates and smaller budgets, so sort of dealing with all of this with smaller budgets like we talked about, and there's still about 14% worried about keeping up with the technology expectations and 14% with the changing workforce demographics, which is where you were talking about, Terry. I'm going to go ahead and hide this, and then just real quickly, what this looks like from a changing workforce perspective. One of the things we see in the future of learning and talent when we asked government and nonprofit entities is we asked a question in our relationship-centered learning survey about how often do employees need to access learning content to do their job. Over 39% of them said daily or more, and 46% said weekly. These are some of the highest numbers out of all business, financial, high-tech, other type of industries. Government and nonprofit answered one of the highest rates here on the fact that they needed to see content on a daily basis or more to do their job. And Terry, maybe we'll start off with you on this, which is, what federal mandates and workforce changes do you think, beyond sort of what we just talked about, the technology changes, are driving the need for more flexible talent development models and that need to sort of see training on almost a daily basis to do jobs?
Yeah, I mean, I think a few things. I think it started, I'll go back to one of the kind of the older mandates first and then kind of jump into some of the newer things. But I think, one, definitely was the Federal Workforce Flexibility Act, which went back to 2003, which required agencies to align training with performance and strategic goals. And then I think, after that, one of the more recent ones, which we, certainly I think it impacts us, is the Telework Enhancement Act of 2010, which really has allowed for a lot more and greater flexibility in the workforce. And also as a result of it, I think the workforce within federal has become more dispersed in the past, as we're talking about, more technologies around mobility and trying to have people be able to do some more of that work that are going to be in different locations other than traditional office type of thing. So I think that certainly helps to make it necessary to have solutions, like this, where you're able to get the information readily. The cloud helps you to be able to do that, I think, in a lot more ways, so to enable some of that mobility that you wouldn't have before. So I think those would be some of the mandates I'd look at. And the other one, which I think we talked about a little bit, and I think both Jeff and Sean talked about, was that cloud-first policy, of course, that came out of OMB a few years ago, and that certainly affects it too. To say, okay, this is one of the ways that you can, be able to utilize that. I mean, so as agencies are looking to say, how can I be effective in my talent management, but also meet some of the requirements and some of the different priorities that the administration may have around cloud first. Having those types of technologies and learning management systems, intelligent management systems that are in the cloud certainly help to do that.
And Jeff, any additions to that as far as the workforce changes or federal mandates that your clients are working with on a regular basis?
Yeah, actually, less on the mandate side. And I know Terry mentioned quite a few there, but one of the things that we're seeing is there's really kind of a growing movement to, I guess I'll call it train like you work and work like you train. And so, it's moving toward a model where learners and users want to have very quick access to content and to things that they need. And if you look back at that graphic, the amount of people that are accessing it on a daily or weekly basis is so high that they're going to need to access that data and those those support items and use it almost like performance support, because that's the way I see that reading, is that if they're using it daily, they're almost using it as a performance support or a support mechanism throughout their daily life and their job. So, we're seeing that tying into, as Terry mentioned, with mobile, but also getting out into, mobile delivery of the content, but, social learning and being able to tie that back in, not just to the learning content or the, pieces of content that they're taking, that they want to access rather than having to go back through a giant module. They want to be able to get right to the content that they need in a timely manner, and then be able to reach out to other people that they may have similar experiences, be in similar roles, taking similar training, to be able to build their support network and be able to accomplish their daily jobs much more quickly and much more efficiently, which really drives the organizational talent up. So, that working like you train and training like you work is really something that we see, growing as a trend.
I love the way that's sort of stated, because I would agree with that. That's one of the things we're definitely seeing, and I think we're seeing it more on the federal and the government and the nonprofit side than we're seeing in some cases on the business side. And I think it's because of the fact that there's so much to do on a daily basis. We're going to wrap up with some last-minute questions here, but while we're doing that, please feel free, if you do have questions for this audience. You've sort of heard some of the things that they know, some of the things they're working with on a day-to-day basis. If you have questions you haven't had a chance to ask yet, we've asked a few of them along the way, please feel free to put them into the Q&A box. We'll try and get to them here as we wrap up our call this afternoon. So let's start. Each of you, I'd like to sort of ask you to sort of give some insight to this audience about how federal agencies can partner with their solution providers more effectively to meet all these future needs that we've been talking about. Terry, I'll start with you, because I think you've got some good insight as to how those organizations can partner better and work more closely together.
Sure, and I think we've addressed a lot of it during the conversation. So I know, again, I know that both Jeff and Sean have talked a little bit about this, but I think, number one, it's really to think of solution providers as partners, and the same thing from the same standpoint that those solution providers are looking at their government agencies as partners. To have a real dialogue about, what is it that you need in order to accomplish your mission, looking at that, looking at the different factors that are involved with it. Certainly cost factors are involved, and I know that Sean got into a lot of detail about what is it you need to think about when you're looking at different types of cloud solutions. So I think having that type of conversation, making sure that that when there are companies out there that have solutions that they are really meeting the government's needs. So I think having that good understanding of what is it that the government needs to accomplish, what types of solutions do they need to have, what kind of security requirements do they have, and really having a good sense of what's out there from the standpoint of that the solution community within federal can be providing for them. So I think it really is just that dialogue, to be able to have that kind of conversation, and for the ability to go in and listen to each other and make sure that we're accomplishing the needs and the mission of what the agency has.
Right. And Jeff, sort of to add to that, is there anything additionally you'd say that federal agencies can do to partner with solution providers that would help both of them and make that relationship work even better for them?
Yeah, I think I would just really add to what Terry was saying. It all starts with that dialogue, right? And if we're talking about shifting toward cloud, that we shouldn't just be moving to a new technology for the sake of moving to a new technology, but rather that it's going to help solve some challenges, specific to their mission. And, some of those may be cost, and some of those may be more effective deployment of that solution that would allow for, more efficient upgrades and patching and support, along the way, as well as making sure that, organizations and agencies have a trusted provider, not just someone who's going to snap in the technology for them, but somebody that they trust, that understands their business, and can guide them through an implementation process so that both organizations can walk out successful.
Yeah, those are really good advice on that front. Sean, how about you? I know you've given a lot of advice on the type of questions organizations should be asking and the type of things they should be probing on. Anything else you feel that this audience would benefit from knowing, sort of as how they as agencies or federal employees can work more closely with their solution providers and come out with a better solution on the end?
Sure. I think one of the things that I see doing this for a long time is that a lot of federal government employees are afraid, or maybe very cautious is a better word, to speak to industry. And that is because of several events that we've seen, obviously, in the newspapers as of late, and the way that those particular events were handled. But I would suggest two things up front. Number one, there are plenty of public industry and government industry engagements going on all the time. You can go to those events. You can go to those occasions where it is a free forum and you're allowed to speak to everybody, because everybody has an equal chance of working with that particular agency. If you're still worried about that particular area and you're looking at FAR regulations and you have a really strong concern, there's nothing wrong with calling your own contracting officer and asking the contracting officer to reach out to a couple of vendors and at least get a dialogue in to where you can get some of the information that you need if you don't feel comfortable in that space. But the bottom line is it always comes down to relationships, right? You need to feel that you can trust not only the vendor to do their job, but that people who are supporting you can do theirs as well. And trust me, there's not one vendor out here who wants to put themselves in a bad position to where they're going to be OCI'd out of an opportunity. So nobody's going to cross that line, at least not willingly.
Well, that is some great advice. I'd say we couldn't get a group of more knowledgeable people on sort of partnering and working in the federal space here, and you've definitely had some great examples of how organizations have worked together. We got only one other question right now that I think might be sort of a good question to ask. We did get a question about, are there a lot of companies, are there a lot of agencies, it's probably a better way to ask the question, that are moving to the cloud? And I'd say, if you looked at some of the data that we had, there was about 33% of organizations currently that have some sort of an LMS that would be considered in some sort of a cloud platform. Maybe as a quick last question there, and I don't know if Sean or maybe Jeff, you guys could answer, do you guys see more agencies? I mean, do you think that this is something that is going to be picking up, moving to the cloud? Is that something that's happening a lot more than what you had seen, say just a year or two ago?
Well, I can speak from a guy's perspective and say that we have engagements in almost every agency, some form or fashion or another. Whether it's a pilot to understand whether or not the cloud is going to work for that particular agency, or it's a full-on engagement that's already been awarded. Just under the ATO from GSA, several agencies have already taken advantage of that. And we have infrastructure as a service up and running. We're hosting lots of things such as public-facing websites, full-on architecture, you name it. We've been there with it, and we've fortunate enough to be able to spend some time with Meridian because these folks are sharp. They know what they're doing, and hopefully we'll get to work together more often. But yes, the answer is government agencies are starting to do this now. I think it's an education process. I don't think it's all going to happen tomorrow, but it is going to happen.
And Jeff,
right, and I would just add on to Sean's comments there, and that obviously we've probably seen more of a movement within the commercial space than with the federal space to cloud and to moving applications to the cloud. But it is certainly happening within the federal space. We've seen as Sean was saying, some organizations starting small, but have already deployed smaller solutions to the cloud and are looking to see how those go, or using them as really a test bed to make sure that they're ironing out the path in front of them to deploy their larger solutions there. And with federal mandates, with the rollout of FedRAMP, we're already seeing large organizations that are pushing to get their solutions that have been traditionally behind their firewall or on-premise hosted solutions into the cloud so that they can take advantage of some of these benefits. So, we feel like, with the partnerships that we have, especially with VIP and CGI, that we're really positioned well for this.
Okay. Well, guys, I appreciate all three of you taking the time to speak with us today and to sit on the panel and have a conversation about your experiences and the work that you've seen being done in the federal space. So thank you, Jeff and Terry and Sean, all three of you. I want to thank Meridian for sponsoring an event like this. It's always helpful when our vendors sponsor events where we can offer educational sessions. It's how we're able to do this for free for the audience. So please make sure you provide comments on your evaluations and let us know if these sessions are being helpful, and if there's any other additional comments about things you'd like to see that we haven't been able to provide, particularly in the federal space. For those of you who are in that space, we'd love to hear some more comments from you about things that would be helpful for you right now. And as always, it's helpful for us to get some feedback on how we can improve these events for you. So once again, thank you to Meridian, thank you to Jeff and Terry and Sean, and thank you to all of our participants today, and we hope that everyone has a very good afternoon, and hopefully wherever you're at, it's warming up. So thanks everyone, and goodbye, and have a good afternoon.